Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics need counseling. We want to thank you for listening to our first episode. My name is Anthony Sitko, and alongside me is my good friend, Dr. Issues.
Hello, mint condition, everybody.
Mint condition, never been opened. So this is what we believe to be the first podcast to discuss the psychiatric issues behind comic book characters. Doc, why don't you give us a little background on who you are and what your qualifications are and why people should even care to listen to you?
All right, fair enough. I am a psychiatrist. What that means is I went to college, then medical school, then a psychiatry residency training program. I am board certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, and I am actively practicing. I work in a hospital setting, which means I see the best of the best or worst of the worst, depending on, how you view those things.
And as I said, my name is Anthony. I am a longtime comic book aficionado, and I've known Dr. Issues for a number of years. In my spare time, I'm also a practicing attorney, and I feel like that's going to come into play maybe for some of the later episodes. But as I said, we started discussing a while back our respective appreciation of comic book characters and thought that there were a number of characters that have just a variety of psychiatric issues. And since we are kind of living in the age of the geek now, where comic book characters are permeating TV, movies, Broadway, that we all know these characters, but there's a deeper understanding that we felt we could foster through these discussions. So we want to hopefully encourage you to listen, to reach out to us. We've got a Twitter, Capes on the Couch, where we have a Facebook page set up. You can email us, capesonthecouch@gmail.com. Obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you can also find us on our website, capesonthecouch.live. And I also want to give a quick shout out and thank you to my cousin Renee for her fantastic work on the logo. So kudos, cousin.
Thank you.
And so we're going to jump right into our first episode. And this one is about one Eddie Brock, a.k.a. Venom.
Wow. Okay. We're really, we're shooting for the moon here.
So the way these episodes, since this is the first episode, the way each episode is going to work is we're just going to give a background on the character and then discuss what some of their primary issues are. And that's where Doc Issues is really going to have a field day, so to speak, with going through some of the issues. And then it'll be more of a back and forth discussion. And then we are going to examine how would you address these issues, both in universe and out of universe. So how would a psychiatrist address Eddie Brock in the Marvel comic universe? And then how would a real life psychiatrist address some of these same issues in an actual individual who may or may not be obsessed with Spider-Man, as we'll come to discuss for Eddie. And then we're going to have a little fun skit at the end that Doc and I are going to really get to play around with, and we certainly hope is entertaining for you, the listeners. But right now we're going to focus on Eddie Brock and his background. And the interesting thing about Eddie Brock, as defined by his relationship with Spider-Man, is Spider-Man was created in 1963. Obviously, he's the face of Marvel Comics. He is considered, one of the greatest comic book characters ever created. We see him in movies and cartoons and that Broadway show. The less said about that, the better. But Eddie Brock, who and Venom is widely considered to be one of his greatest nemesis, was really only created in 1988. And so that's 25 years that Spider-Man was in existence before Eddie Brock even showed up. And yet Venom / Eddie Brock, in that short time span, in the 30 years now, has really cemented himself as one of Spider-Man's greatest adversaries and occasionally allies. And I think that's just interesting from a timeline perspective on the character.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I up until you said that, I did not realize it was that late. See, I'm going to be learning along with all of you here about some of these characters. I mean, I'm going to be familiar with them ahead of time, but yeah, you'll notice that Anthony, with the aid of some resources, has an encyclopedic knowledge of a lot of these characters, and that's really what I'm going to continue to play on throughout these episodes. It's going to be a lot of fun.
And we also use, we've read the comics beforehand. We have Marvel Unlimited, which is a fantastic resource. I honestly wish DC had something very similar to it. It would certainly make our research a little bit easier. And so getting it back into Eddie Brock. So he was created we first really see him in the last page of issue 299. I think that was April of 1988. And then issue 300 is where we really get to see the full Eddie Brock and the Venom character as we understood him, wearing that black symbiote costume that we had previously seen on Peter Parker Spider-Man as of the Secret Wars miniseries. That bonded with him and then kind of turned his life upside down, and it began taking over and ruining Peter Parker. So what happened was Eddie Brock was a journalist who was writing for the Bugle, and he, as was later sort of retconned into the existing Spider-Man story, is he outed a man that was known as the Sin Eater that Spider-Man had battled. And Eddie Brock had this big scoop where he outed who the Sin Eater was, except it was a guy who just was a compulsive liar and claimed to be the Sin Eater, but he actually wasn't. And so Peter Parker as journalist and Spider-Man as hero outed the Sin Eater, revealed who he really was, captured him. This made Eddie Brock into a laughing stock. It destroyed his career. He ended up having to write for tabloids. He started bodybuilding as a way to relieve stress, except that didn't work for him. And so here was a man who was raised in a Catholic household, decides he's going to commit suicide because he can't live with the guilt anymore. And he goes to church to pray for forgiveness for the sin that he's about to commit. And this is, for those of you that may have seen Spider-Man 3, this was sort of played out in a sense. I'm not going to get into the whole Topher Grace as Eddie Brock thing, because, again, the less said about that, the better. But the symbiote had been rejected by Spider-Man because it's allergic to the sonic vibrations of the church bells. So the symbiote, which is technically a sentient entity, as we come to find out later, known as the Clintar. I don't know who came up with that name. It finds out Eddie Brock, who's in this church, who Eddie feels his life has been ruined by Spider-Man and Peter Parker. The symbiote has been rejected by Peter Parker and Spider-Man and says, we can merge. We can make something horrendous and beautiful together. And so the darkness bonds with Eddie. They go and proceed to make Peter's life absolutely miserable. And so Eddie/Venom, really work in concert with each other to battle Spider-Man on a number of occasions. And then the symbiote creates this spawn, and the first spawn of many, and that one is known as Carnage, and that bonds with Cletus Cassidy, who's an inmate. Is it Ravenscroft? I think is
something like that. I'll be honest, I don't remember.
I'm pretty sure it's Ravenscroft Institute. Cletus Cassidy is just whew. And yeah. I believe on the list, we have a list of characters that we'll be addressing, and I'm pretty sure Carnage is on that list for a later episode. Mm-hmm. Eddie and Spider-Man kind of put their differences aside and battle Carnage because he's just far crazier, and Eddie's thing is more personal to Peter Parker. And then he's going through some stuff, and Spider-Man actually ends up saving Eddie's ex-wife. And so he realizes, maybe Spider-Man's not maybe he's not such a bad guy after all. And goes and becomes sort of like an anti-hero. This, of course, being the 90s, where, you can't just have a clean-cut hero. Everybody's got to have a dark and edgy side. And then you had separation anxiety, where the five children were spawned off, and he had to battle them. And then he sort of goes back to being a villain for a little while. And then it's revealed that Eddie Brock has cancer, and that's when the Hunger storyline takes over. And now the symbiote is actually the only thing sort of keeping Eddie alive. And then Eddie dies, but the symbiote brings him back to life. Again, comics. And then he begins working with a man named Martin Lee. He's volunteering in, I think, a soup kitchen. And Martin Lee, of course, is Mr. Negative. And so Mr. Negative's energy interacts somehow with whatever remnants of the symbiote are left. And now he's Anti-Venom. Now he's a hero. And his symbiote is actually lethal and toxic to the original symbiote, which I believe at this point was attached to Mac Gargan. And so then they battle, and now he's battling Mac Gargan as Venom, and he's also battling Mr. Negative. And then somehow he ends up with the Toxin symbiote, which is another spawn. I don't remember the specificities of how exactly that came to be.
Pretty sure that was bonded to a police officer. Forgot his name.
Lee Price.
Thank you.
Lee Price. And that's when he rebonded to the Venom symbiote. And I think at one point when he was Toxin, he was fighting Flash Thompson, Agent Venom. But now, so now I believe, again, I haven't kept up on everything, but he's back as Venom. The point being, Eddie Brock and this symbiote have had a roller coaster of a history together, up, down, on, off, love, hate. And it has led to some very interesting dynamics as far as the impact that has had on his psyche. And before I guess we get into sort of the primary issues, Doc, if you want to chime in with anything else that you have to add from your, history and knowledge and understanding of the character.
Sure. The one thing I'll say is that this conversation is going to focus on Eddie Brock and Venom, as opposed to all of the offshoots that Anthony mentioned. Mainly, well, two reasons. One, for time constraints. Unless you really want to get into a 3 or 4 hour conversation, I understand you're driving or jogging or doing whatever it is you do while listening to podcasts. The other reason is that this is a situation where I think we really have two things going on in one person, and I'm going to give you the side eye if we start talking multiple personalities, but the point being, I think the more focused we can be on this, the better. I'm going to say also that this is a situation where Eddie Brock and the symbiote, I'm going to almost, I don't want to say exclusively, but for the most part, treat them as two people, but I know that they have to be together at the same time, but we'll get into that in much more detail shortly.
So that was sort of just a background and a history on Eddie Brock, again, with and without the symbiote attached. But now I want to get into the primary issues of Eddie Brock. And I think going back, and this was mentioned during, I think it was a separation anxiety, we learned a little bit more about his backstory, his pre-symbiote life. Mm-hmm. But his mother died during childbirth, and his father was very cold and distant. And I think that's something we see, I don't want to say frequently in comic book characters, but certainly there is an element of a single parent, and that difficulty of a parental relationship having an impact later on in life. So primarily, what do you think the impact of just having that cold, hard father had on Eddie Brock as it, sort of happened later on in life? What impacts did that have for him moving forward?
Well, that's an excellent point. Attachment is the most important thing that happens in a child's life. I mean, from birth. This isn't a situation where we consider it convenient. This is necessary for life. There have been plenty of biological studies that have shown that. So in this case, he doesn't get the maternal attachment, which in all honesty is the most important. He doesn't get that when his mother, is dead. So, daddy has to step up to the plate, except daddy doesn't do that. So now that basically is no different than, best example I could think of that everyone knows is ducks. When a duckling is born, the first person it sees, that's who they consider to be their caregiver, and they'll follow them to the ends of the earth. We're not that much different, to be honest with you. I mean, but unfortunately, while ducklings have a very short time when they can walk around and, start being more independent, babies are these little globs of goo that need absolutely everything taken care of. And if daddy and mommy aren't able to do that, then it just creates this open playground, and I don't mean that in a good way. Basically, you're going to have a child that's going to try and attach to anything it can, and if it doesn't get that, then it's basically going to start developing an identity that, maybe it's something I did. Maybe I'm not worthy of being loved. Maybe I'm not worthy of having all of the things that other children have or other people have. And it's going to try and fill that void any way it can. And I think that does play a role significantly with Mr. Brock and how he starts dealing with things as an adult.
So that was sort of the childhood. But then as we see later on, as he grows to be an adult, he does maintain a relationship. He does have an ex-wife. And again, I don't remember exactly what led to the dissolution of the marriage. Although based on what we know of Eddie Brock and his personality, I can hazard a few guesses. But he does become a successful journalist. And I forget exactly what it was. He saw I think it was maybe the Vietnam War, at least as it related to the time frame, in Marvel at the time, because when this story was written, it was, 1988. And as a young man, he would have certainly seen the Vietnam War. But I think that's what led to him gaining an interest in journalism. And he does, in fact, as I said, become a successful journalist. And this Bugle story about the Sin Eater really is what he envisioned to be the thing that was going to make his career. And this was his big scoop. And it was certainly a big to-do. And then that was taken away from him. As he considered it, it was taken away from him by Peter Parker, the journalist, and Spider-Man. And so what you then have is this jealousy and this teeming hatred towards Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Of course, Eddie Brock at the time doesn't know that they are one and the same, but he holds this envy and this jealousy and hatred towards Peter. And then why don't if you could just explain what that does to someone's psyche and sort of his mindset of hating, these two people who then later he determines to be one.
All right. That's an excellent point. I just realized, actually, the way you described it, the fact that Eddie Brock becomes a journalist, I think is important back to what we had just mentioned with his childhood. A journalist's job is to point out what's going on in the world. And it's kind of a glimpse into how his mind processes the things that have happened. So he gets an opportunity then in a mature way to put his own spin on, his own stamp on society. And that's incredibly positive. And as you mentioned, if this is something that he can do to gain some sort of acclaim and also to go back to his own sense of self-worth, then hey, more power to him. That sounds like a wonderful thing. Now, the fact that it didn't work out, that's a negative. No question about it. It's a bad thing. Nobody likes failure. Nobody likes humiliation. Nobody likes a lack of success. But this is rare because he now has an external locus. Everything that was going on with him, he always had to deal with himself. He had to deal with how he felt about how things were going. Now he has an opportunity to put the blame outside. This person, whoever it was, Peter Parker, Spider-Man, whatever, hey, they're the ones that caused all of these problems. They're the ones at fault. Therefore, what do we do about that? Well, one way is you confront the person and you find out, hey, what's going on? Why did you mess up my life? I mean, once again, exaggerating, but, that's one way to deal with it. But that type of conversation probably isn't all that fun in a comic book setting. So instead, we get opportunities through the writers to have a character created that's much more powerful. And I think that's going to come into play with this, where you can eliminate the external factor. And that is where we really start to see where the fun happens.
Now, let's touch on the symbiote, because obviously the symbiote is, and I know that we're primarily focusing on the psychoanalysis of Eddie Brock, but you cannot talk about a situation like this without addressing the symbiote. Now, the symbiote carries with it its own, knowledge and history. And as was referenced at one point in the comics, this particular symbiote amongst the Clintar was rejected by its own people, its own culture, for being too homicidal and being too crazy. So you've already got an imbalanced symbiote that then bonds with Peter Parker in Secret Wars and gives him this grand swell of power and strength, then begins using Parker's body while he's sleeping. Peter's sleeping and the symbiote goes out and does whatever. And then Peter wakes up and he's like, why am I so tired? Peter eventually rejects the symbiote because he doesn't like the person that he's becoming when he's with the suit. So now you have a symbiote that was already imbalanced, now was attached to this very good and pure person, and now rejected by Spider-Man. This wasn't like a symbiote that was rejected by a bad person. This wasn't someone that was rejected by a being of evil. This was rejected by Spider-Man. Peter Parker is widely considered to be, dare I say, the heart of the Marvel Universe. So if Peter Parker doesn't want you, I think that goes to the symbiote psyche. Now the symbiote is drawn to Eddie. They bond. And now you have a situation where this symbiote knows a lot, everything about Peter Parker and Spider-Man, is aware of the dual identity. Now that bonds with a person who hates Peter Parker and Spider-Man separately for different reasons, gives Eddie this knowledge. Now you have a situation where this is just the perfect confluence of negative events. What does that do to Eddie Brock to now have this sudden influx of knowledge and power and strength, and being able to focus that solely on the person that, as you said, that external locus that he blames for everything that is wrong in his life?
All right. Well, that's powerful. So now you have a situation where you've already said it, a symbiote. By the way, I just want to say this, biologically, using the term symbiote is fantastic. Symbiosis is when two organisms basically say, hey, I have something that I need, you have something you need, and together we're going to be able to use our biological processes to not just survive an environment, but to thrive in an environment greater than we could alone. That's, the type of relationship that the creators, decided to go with. And I think it's fantastic in this case, because in many ways you could say, especially from a physical standpoint, that this was a relationship that definitely thrived. You have Eddie Brock, who, now has an event that he psychologically has to place an external locus of control and say, okay, how do I eliminate this? Now, Eddie Brock, he worked out. He did a lot of things positive for his life and things that he wanted to do. But I'm pretty sure if you said, hey, Eddie, go up and beat up Spider-Man, that's not going to work. Okay. But the symbiote, an entity that basically says, hey, I know absolutely everything about your opponent. I know every single hidden fact. I have every biological fact. Anything that you could ever need about this particular person. Hey, let's go for it. As you've already stated, it has an aggressive personality. I don't know if you can say that as a symbiote. I guess you have to. And so, yeah, they'll feed on that. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the most common words that's used whenever Venom is described. Feeding, hunger, those primal instincts start to take over. And when you do that, you're like I said, physically, okay, yeah, they did great. In terms of overall benefit, I'm not so sure about that. I think it created more harm than good. I'm sure, that you've already given examples where they played with that a little bit on the more positive side, but the absolute focus on Spider-Man, Peter Parker, that was obsession. That was something that took over everything. And when that psychological obsession took over, it basically created a complete lack of anything else. You don't need anything else in life if you have something that's going to take up 100% of your time. I think that's unhealthy no matter what. I don't care if the original goal was positive or negative.
But now it's a situation where we've seen even early on with the character, he's certainly got that singular focus on Spider-Man and Peter Parker. And we see that he stalks, he stalks Peter Parker. His literal first appearance is he's hiding in the shadows waiting for Mary Jane to come home. So, honey, I'm home. He stalks Peter Parker. He stalks Aunt May. But at the same time, Peter says to him, why aren't you going after these? You know everything about me. Why aren't you hurting these people? And Venom's response is they're innocent. And I think that's a very interesting thing, that Eddie Brock, in spite of this, and I think it's in spite of and because of the singular minded focus on Spider-Man, he doesn't want to hurt innocents. It doesn't corrupt him to the degree that it could have. Certainly as homicidal as this symbiote is, it hasn't completely overridden Eddie Brock's, good Catholic nature to not want to hurt innocent people. And so I think that is one of the things that potentially leads to him becoming an anti-hero and even later on anti-Venom, and giving sort of that credence to that heroic personality. What is your take on that aspect of it, and the fact that he's as much as he's willing to destroy Spider-Man and occasionally harm people who try to stop him from hurting Spider-Man, he's not willing to hurt innocent people.
Well, that's a very good point. I think that does speak to the fact that Eddie Brock, as a human being, does have other goals and other focuses. It's a matter of harnessing those other goals to basically put forth enough energy so that he can do something besides deal with Spider-Man. And in this case, the way you're describing it, he needed examples, and we'll get into this with treatment, but he needed examples of Spider-Man not being this 100% roadblock, I guess is the way to put it. He's not the thing that's going to destroy everything about Eddie Brock's life, even though he's getting plenty of feedback that that's the case. So he's able to overcome that. You mentioned a fantastic protective factor, which is a religious background. If you have a level of faith in things, once again, that are beyond yourself, that you think that there is some good in the world, then you can use that. But these are all things that I'm pretty sure, at least the way it's described, aren't things that he thinks about in the moment. It's more something that he has to learn to focus on more, just to survive through the day. It's, in other words, it's something that he's able to do for bursts of time because he's able to shift his focus. But I don't think it's something, and at least the way it's been written in the past, it's not something that he can do for extended periods of time. He cannot permanently be Anti-Venom. He can't permanently say, or he can, and to be blunt, he can't permanently say, hey, if I'm good enough, I can do this on my own. I don't need a symbiote. He can't do that. It's something that, yes, it can produce some positive results, but that's draining in the long run, incredibly draining. And actually, in some ways, it might be emasculating. The reason I say that, this, once again, it's a biological thing. And you've seen how Venom is drawn, people. You see how you always have this black ooze that just takes over, and then it creates these morphological things with teeth and tongue and fangs and the eyes and all that stuff. The reason I'm bringing that up is you gotta wonder, when does he get downtime? I'm talking like just basic human bodily functions, I'm not just talking about bathroom. I'm talking about sex. I'm talking about lots of things that we take for granted. He doesn't get that break, So even if he has other goals in life, he just wants, if you just want to say, you know what, can I just, maybe read a book or whatever, and you have this other thing that constantly, no matter what, 100% of the time is giving you other ideas. That's going to be rough. That's going to be the type of thing that drains a person permanently.
Now, tying into that, because this is something that is always utilized in the comics and in writing, and you mentioned, when do I get this downtime? I don't know that they think of it as a singular entity, because when bonded with the symbiote, Eddie always refers to it as we. There is that collective, and that's a writing choice that was made from the very beginning when the character was created. Particularly, you see it with Eddie. It does occur, to some extent with Mac and with Flash, but particularly with Eddie, it's this notion of we, and this idea that individual Eddie and individual symbiote no longer exist, that they are a dual singular entity, if that makes sense, and maybe you can shine some light on that from a psychological standpoint. But the notion that there is no more one, that they are bonded forever. So to your point, and maybe you can address this, I don't know that there is a situation where Eddie thinks, well, what if I want to read a book, or I can do this, because he no longer thinks in the singular. He thinks in the collective. And maybe you could shine some light on that. In as much as you can make a real life discussion and parallel to something that is very clearly not based in real life whatsoever. Right.
Well, the best way I can put it is relationships. Everyone needs relationships. I know we touched on the most primal ones with parents, but you need acquaintances, you need friends, you need most people look at a significant other, even if it's just dating. Relationships don't have to be permanent. They don't have to be exactly the same all the time, but they are necessary. We are social creatures, and the good news is, with a symbiote, you always have a relationship. Yay! And that relationship is going to be there no matter what, with significant repercussions and, like I said, very little space. In other words, with most relationships, you end up in times where you're going to be by yourself. You're going to be alone. That isn't happening here. So the collective we, Yeah, the argument could be made that that's a different quote unquote organization than just one person or even just two people interacting. And it's incredibly unique for this circumstance. But I'm going to treat it as if you have two people that decided that they're going to try and be lockstep, almost like they're twins. But even with twins, you'll notice that for the most part, there are going to be times where they're not going to be side by side, walking step in step, hand in hand, doing everything exactly the same way with the exact same thoughts, the exact same mannerisms, I should say. It's not something that I think I can identify at any point in society. So from that standpoint, I can't imagine that that's healthy. I think that ultimately you're going to have to find a way if you really want. And I know this goes back to the whole symbiosis thing. They said they've thrived now together. It's like, well, can you thrive apart? Is there, I'm not even saying it has to be permanent, but just something different. That type of, at least from what I know of the human brain, it's not designed to have external influences from one single source constantly be with it. That is something that's going to drain a person's energy. Period.
Sensory overload.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we I feel like we've kind of addressed a number of the primary issues on Eddie Brock, and now we get into the fun aspect where, this has all been theoretical, but now application of this, and we'll start in universe. How would you treat Eddie Brock as a psychiatrist in the Marvel universe? And we'll stick to comics. As I said, I know that, he's been in movies and there's the new one coming out with Tom Hardy. How they're going to address that when there's no Spider-Man, I don't know. I'm curious. We'll go with curious to see how they pull that off. But in any event, you're a psychiatrist in the Marvel universe. Spider-Man is one of the biggest, most famous heroes in universe, not even just necessarily out of universe. Spider-Man is everywhere. Eddie Brock lives in New York. Spider-Man could be swinging down Fifth Avenue at any given point. How do you focus on treating someone who's the object of their obsession and their hatred is, dare I say, omnipresent in your universe? How do you deal with that?
Okay. Well, with the information that we have, we know that the symbiote has certain weak points. Basically, I'm trying to create a safe environment for myself. Sorry to be selfish, people, but I do want to survive. So I do not.
How selfish of you.
I do not need to have an overpowered, angry, singular focused being, even if it's non-violent towards me, because I have nothing directly to do with Spider-Man or Peter Parker. Heaven forbid it gets the idea, like, because he saw Spider-Man swinging in the background, that now I'm in between it and Spider-Man. But the point being, I think I've mentioned how I think unhealthy that constant symbiote presence is. And I also am aware that trying to completely eliminate it is not realistic. Therefore, I want some disruption. If it's, sonar or something, just something to get it a little uncomfortable, because therapy, believe it or not, creates discomfort. That's part of it, because that's when the positive work can be done, because a person can't be 100% comfortable and think that they're going to progress. You need challenges, Now, obviously, it has the external challenge of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, but it wants to kill him, wants to destroy him. Okay, well, we can't have that. That's not considered a positive result. Okay, so first of all, protect myself. Make sure if it's a sonic disruptor or something, just get that symbiote just a little frayed. So now, okay, we could deal with Eddie. Why am I saying that? Once again, I'm going to be personally selfish. I think the human race is awesome. I want to deal with Eddie Brock. I want to get him better. Dealing with with a species that I'm not really familiar with. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So from there, now I have to see, okay, Eddie, what's going on, man? I mean, it seems like the number one emotion is anger, at least throughout the comics, the most consistent emotion that I see as a problem is the anger with this obsession. Basically, you know, the rage that goes on whenever Spider-Man is mentioned. Like it's instant, you know, and that's something that it's unconscious at this point. It's automatic, but you have to split them out. You have to split out, okay, what actually is the trigger point, which we got. That's really obvious.
I was just about to say, I know that word is overused a little bit in this day and age, but Peter Parker is certainly a trigger for Eddie Brock. So after you call Reed Richards and you get the sonic disruptor and it you know sort of freaks out the symbiote, then how do you address the trigger point? Is separation, physical separation, an option? Is it a situation where you say, listen, Mr. Brock, you know, why don't you move to somewhere where at least you don't have to see Peter Parker on a daily basis? You're not constantly reminded of his presence. You know, is that a viable suggestion? You
know what? In the immediate sense, it could be. Obviously, you don't want the person to be at their most heightened state of whatever the emotion is, anger, sadness, betrayal, whatever. So yes, to develop rapport, that can be a good thing. However, as we've already mentioned, Spider-Man is everywhere in the Marvel universe. So you can get that maybe temporarily, but heaven forbid there's a major crisis in the world. And, you know, it's not like that doesn't happen often in the Marvel universe, in which case you're going to have not just Spider-Man, but other characters that probably are going to be looking out for, you know, their interests and, you know, hey, there's Venom. Is he involved? Let's get him. You know, I'm not saying that they're automatically going to target him, but the point being the world, in real life is a smaller place now. And in the Marvel universe, I mean, come on, you could be anywhere you want, you know, in a fairly short period of time. So, and, you know, you got to also think of the quality of life. I mean, is Eddie Brock or Venom, you know, really going to say, oh yeah, I'm just going to stay in, you know, in an Arctic environment away from all society and everything else for as long as this takes? I mean, it might be a nice novel, you know, to just write him off as a character for a few issues. But I don't think that's going to work in the long run, you know, and more importantly, once again, you still have the symbiote saying, hey, but what about Peter Parker? What about Spider-Man? It's always going to be on its mind, you know? Yeah. And that's the unique part in comic universe. You're going to have that added reminder, even if you don't have the stimulus, you know? So in other words, you got someone, basically think of having someone that's your, I'll go ahead. I'll put a positive spin, even if I don't believe it. You have your best friend basically trying to trigger you every day. That's, I'm not sure you know, a geographical separation is going to make a difference, you know, in the long run. So short term, yes. Long term, no.
So moving to Siberia, not ultimately a good treatment plan for Eddie Brock.
No.
So then moving forward, how would you get him back as a productive member of society? Because he does have skills. He does have a skill set that he did at one point prior to the symbiote's introduction into his life and the ruin by Spider-Man that he did use. So how would you get him to focus then on his desire to help and his desire to use those journalism skills to benefit people again? And would that in turn be a boon and a benefit to his therapy?
Yes, that's a great point. I think I'm thinking more in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy, and the whole basis of that, we already mentioned, you got a trigger point. Okay. So you got Peter Parker, Spider-Man. You've got the end point, which is anger, rage, physical, aggression, you know, which we consider to be the negative things. Those are the A and the C, you know. The question is, we need the B point. The B point is, what's the thought? What's the sentence that a person is saying to themselves that leads from the antecedent? That's where the A comes to the C. That's the consequence. B is is the belief.
So how do you get from steal underpants to profit?
Phase one, steal underpants.
Wow.
Phase 3, profit. Yeah, but what's phase 2?
Yeah.
Phase 3 is profit. Yeah, but how do we get to phase 2?
Wow. Okay. So
sorry, I apologize for interjecting. This is literally You were saying, how do we get from A to
Yes,
C, but we need
you're
to
right.
B? I was like,
You're right.
Underpants gnomes.
That's true. Though.
Underpants.
That's true. And believe it or not, this is what we do every day in life. We go from A to C just without everything we do. And we never think about the phase 2. We never think about the B point. So that's my job. And here's the thing. It's not something that you can just.
So you're an underpants thief, or you're an underpants seller then. You're the middleman in the underpants. That's your job.
Wow. Okay. Well, you know what? In all honesty, if that's the way people want to remember it, then cool. Psychiatrists are underpants thieves. That's great. The point being, you have to help that person find what the belief is. You may have the exact statement or the exact belief in mind that you want the person to get to, but it doesn't do a darn bit of good. You could say it to the person to their face. It's irrelevant because that's not something that they've ever thought of in their life. So in this case, it's, well, we've already said it actually, this outside person, Spider-Man, Peter Parker, whatever, they caused everything wrong in my life. That's the basic statement, and you can expand it a little bit to say, things that are outside of my control every single aspect of my life. Those are very dangerous statements to make because it leaves you powerless, ironically. It's basically you're saying the world just rolls the dice with you and nothing else can happen. But Eddie Brock in his own life had already proven that wrong because he had a lot of things start off wrong in his life. He didn't have the proper environment from his parents to lead him the right way. He got intervention though in terms of his faith. He was able to get an education. He had a lot of things that he had already done. So sometimes just pointing out things that have already happened in a person's life, making sure that they recognize that they're not all negative, that can be a benefit. But the thing is, you really have to challenge them. You have to question them in a way. And my style is to do it in a ridiculous way because people have to respond to ridiculous statements. If you say something that kind of sort of makes sense, they'll kind of sort of agree, but they're not going to really evoke the type of response that's going to produce change. So if I say, Eddie, actually, you've done quite a bit in your life. It's like, okay, whatever. But if I say, Eddie, or in this case, Venom, because I don't think addressing him as Eddie is going to be that great, but, you have this goal. Let's start with your goal. You want Spider-Man eliminated. How's that working out for you? Have you done it? Spider-Man's still swinging around, still doing all this stuff, getting all this attention and everything. And that's been your number one focus. That's been your top goal. How's your system? How's your plan working out for you? Now that's the thing, because that's the truth. Spider-Man alive? Yes. Okay. You failed. Now I would not say it that way to Venom. Okay.
Not unless you want to be buried 6 feet under very quickly.
I'm just saying this in terms of the ultimate goal, rapid fire, so that if Eddie Brock, as a part of Venom, recognizes that that's a failure, you're going to actually create, the ability for the person to say, okay, if that's not working, then what will? But I got to change it because now it's going to be what Venom's going to think is, oh, so this man's going to help me destroy Spider-Man, destroy Peter Parker. No. The point is, we've got to change your view of this person being the target. There is no need for a target. That's a much bigger and much more difficult goal. And that's why therapy usually takes a while as opposed to just being 1 or 2 sessions. So first, doing that challenge part and then saying, okay, you mentioned he's done everything wrong, but then you have your own evidence. Like, why on earth did he save someone that you cared about? Why on earth did you partner with him against a greater evil? Why on earth? What's going on here? And I'm not confused. I know why, but I have to say it that way so that this person comes to the conclusion themselves. That's where a person gets improvement. It's like, well, wait a minute. If we only had a situation where we could have someone that could find out this information and convey it to the world in a way that they could understand, you know anybody with those skills, someone that could communicate information to the general public. I don't know. Is that person weren't you a journalist? Just in the long run, kind of bringing it back to what the person's strengths are. After it's unfortunate to say it this way, but it's the truth. You're basically breaking down fundamentals of that person's system that have been quote unquote working, making them realize, okay, here are the parts that aren't working, and then rebuilding from there and saying, okay, this is what you can integrate back in. You know, you're breaking them down to build them back up.
So now that was addressing Eddie Brock / Venom in universe. Now, in real life, assuming this individual is not necessarily superpowered, but taking some of the aspects of Eddie Brock and his negative emotions and traits and history and applying them to a real life individual. Let's say we've got a real life journalist whose life and career were ruined by a coworker that they trusted, that worked with them, that made them into a fool. And now they've projected, I guess, as you said, the external locus and as the focus of all of their hatred. How would you treat a real life person with some of these issues? And to what extent would it be different than the way that you would potentially treat, Eddie Brock / Venom?
Yeah. Well, the good news is I would have that person individually. I don't have to worry about any separation directly from the person. Although if it's an abusive relationship, if it's a coworker, it's much simpler. But if it's an abusive relationship, you do still want to make sure that there's a safe space, a safe environment where that person can talk confidentially alone about what's going on, because separating that person out from the overall environment, in other words, if it's a coworker, you're working in that same building, you're going to see that person coming down the hallway. You may see them at lunch. They may be in the next cubicle. I mean, that's still going to be a difficult thing they're going to have to deal with on an ongoing basis. But, the ABC part remains pretty much the same. And I can give, as many exaggerated examples of, for example, that lack of control, to put a different spin on it, because there are so many ways you can do this type of therapy. Okay, so part of it is this person controls every aspect of my life. Like, okay, well, how true is that? If you're in a cubicle and you're typing on a keyboard, like, is that person coming over and are they on your shoulder typing on your same keyboard? Like, wait, that sounds ridiculous. Because it is. Okay. And you said they control every aspect of your life. When you're sleeping, you say, oh, yeah, I think about them all the time. Like, okay, but you're thinking about them. Are they in bed with you? Like, whoa, what? Yeah, yes, that sounds ridiculous. Once again. Okay. So, you have periods of time where you're away from this person. What are you doing with that time? You said you're thinking about them. What else do you do? Do you have other things that are important in your life? Okay, that's good. All right. Now, the other part being, okay, is this a person? You mentioned coworker. I'm going to take it a step further. What if that's your boss? My goodness, and the person would probably, and everybody, of course, comes to that. I mean, oh, well, you just leave your job, you just move or anything. Oh, you got bills to pay. You got to deal with the situation, So first is, let's go with the basic survival. Okay. You have to recognize that you have control over even the smallest of things, When I go to the bathroom, this person's not with me. This person's not following me. When I'm sleeping, that's my time. When I'm away from the office, that's my time, So I need to use that time to not think about this person, because you have to give them the basic tools to recover, because be it their own anger towards that person, you don't want them retaliating. And of course, if this person is abusive, that's the other thing. I don't want to ignore reality. If the person is being abusive, then, you do ultimately want them to get away from that abuse, or you want them to get away from that situation. But you got to give them the basic tools before they can remove themselves. What happens so much, though, is that this person, because they have the feel of the outside influence, you got to bring some of it more internal, and you have to give them, I like to give affirmations, and I don't care how hokey it sounds, you allow them to say a sentence, I have control over how I feel, that's the most basic. But then from there, you can make it much more positive. You could say, I'm going to control the things I can, and if you're religious, because I know we've mentioned that before, it depends on the person, but, the Serenity Prayer is one of the best things I've ever heard, in other words, God help me to, control the things I'm going to butcher it. I apologize. And if you know it, then you could say it. But basically, what do you call it? The
Lord grant me the power, or the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the power to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
That's it. I apologize. On the spot, I do terribly with those. But that's part of the point.
I was going to say an affirmation was that, like, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me, unless I'm molesting them.
All right, complete aside, if Saturday Night Live ever wants to sponsor this podcast, we're more than happy to have that. Once again, without being so hokey about it, yeah, that's fine. In all honesty, it's a personal thing. It's much better if the person comes up with their own affirmations rather than you just feeding it to them. But that sense of self-worth is so powerful, because that's ultimately what this is about. Usually anger, depression and all of that. It's based on the lack of control and the feeling of, not being able to do anything yourself. If you can challenge that in different ways, it really does improve a person's life. And that's really where I would go with it, and that's what everybody deserves to feel. And in multiple parts of life, in work, interpersonal relationships at home and whatever other goals they have. That's the way to go about it. If you just focus on the idea of, and don't get me wrong, I know our society at times can be aggressive about it and, competitive. But if you can switch it up to make it a much more personal and positive goal rather than just, I'm going to beat the other guy, you'll end up with a greater sense of satisfaction. You'll end up with much less stress, which, as anybody knows right now, stress is a big part of what keeps people, I don't want to say keeps them down, but yeah, basically, stress is good in that it allows people to move forward in life, but you do too much of it and it just drains you, and you don't need a symbiote for that.
So I think we've done a pretty good job of sort of summarizing the ways to treat Eddie Brock. And I certainly hope that, at least as far as your real life treatment is concerned, some people can take some of these lessons and utilize them. And that's one of the things that I hope for this podcast is we can shine light on some issues that are very prevalent to what we go through in our daily lives. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to start with a character like Eddie Brock, because I feel that the notion of the hatred and that projection of all of our failures on a external individual or even just an external source is so relatable. It's just a universal feeling that at some point we've all blamed someone else for our own shortcomings. We've always said, oh, they're holding me back or they caused this to befall me. So I think that's one of the reasons why Eddie Brock makes for such a good character for our pilot episode, so that we can touch on these issues and people can understand, ways that they can take the lessons that you've provided and move them forward and utilize them in our own daily life. And as I said, that's something that I think we can certainly hope to encourage moving forward with the majority of our podcast episodes. All
right. I think this is something that, and this is true for most mental health professionals, we learn along with the patients because everyone is different. Every situation is different. Everyone's going to respond differently to different circumstances. We're not perfect. We certainly are going to have our own biases, our own experiences. Sometimes our own direct experiences can influence the type of advice we give. But as long as it's coming from a positive place and we're all looking for the same goal, which is to be a little bit better than we were before, then I think it'll be worth it.
Fantastic. So now that we did all of that serious stuff, now we're going to have a little fun because Doc and I have known each other for a number of years, and we want to leave you. We want to make you think, but we also kind of want to make you laugh. Or at least I hope you've chuckled at some of the jokes throughout this episode. But one of the things that's going to be a recurring feature throughout our podcast is now taking all of those real life lessons and those therapy techniques that we've discussed throughout the episode and applying them. And what would happen if we were actually able to get Eddie Brock /Venom on Dr. Issue's couch, and how would that sort of play out? So we're going to have some fun. We don't have a script. This isn't rehearsed in any way, shape, or form. This is just sort of off the cuff. So I don't know how it's going to go. Doc, I'm going to try to have fun with you, and you just try to do your thing.
I'm definitely going to have fun with this. I will say this. Don't try this at home. I'm not trying to encourage people to become, backseat counselors. It's more just, you have some fun with it. And, anything that happens to me in the podcast stays in the podcast. Okay. So
aside from the part where we broadcast this out to the world.
Well, I'm sure the I don't know how many listeners we have now, 2, 3, 10 million, whatever. We'll see how it goes.
So this is going to be what happens when Eddie Brock sits on Dr. Issues' couch.
All right. Mr. Brock, Eddie, or
we prefer Venom.
Okay. Venom. What brings you here today?
We were ruined by Spider-Man. We were famous. We were successful. And then that web crawler took it from us. He and his little alter ego, Peter Parker. We're going to destroy them both. Did you know Peter Parker is Spider-Man? We know. We know everything about him, his wife, where he lives, what he does in his spare time, and we're going to take it all from him. Because that's what he did to us. He took it from us.
Okay. I see you feel very strongly about this. I did not know that Peter Parker was Spider-Man, but this is all a confidential session.
No, don't keep it confidential. We wanted to post it on the front page of the Bugle, but Jameson won't answer our calls.
Okay. Wow. So how long have you been dealing with this, Mr. Venom?
He ruined us. This has been going on for so long now. The symbiote hates Peter Parker. Eddie hates Peter Parker. We hate Peter Parker.
Oh.
And we hate Spider-Man.
Oh, okay. I noticed, there's a heavy we there. I think we're going to have to address that in some way. I get I'm talking to Venom, and it's we and Eddie. You sound very angry about all of this. Is there...
Wouldn't you be angry if someone took everything from you and ruined your life?
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand this. You're saying that Peter Parker purposely, stole the story? He sorry.
He made us look like fools.
Okay.
We had a story. It made us famous. And then he ruined us by outing us.
Oh, okay. All right, outing is very difficult, but I don't think it's the outing that... I'm sorry, never mind. Now, in order to really get to the bottom of this, in some way, I'm going to need to talk to Eddie, and then, I mean, I've never treated a symbiote before, but
there is no Eddie, there is no symbiote, there is only we. There is only Venom.
Oh, okay. I'll admit I don't have the resources I wish I did right now, but is there a way we can just kind of get I'll call my agent, we can we can just separate you two a little bit.
Wait, there's a buzzing. I hear it. You're trying to ruin us. No, you're trying to separate us.
Give it a little
You're
time.
trying to take the power away from us. No, you want us to show you the power of the suit?
We'll show you.
Well, that was something. That was a thing that happened. You okay over there, Doc?
Yeah, I think I'm okay.
Like all good or like all comic book characters, I suppose. Doc Issues is returned from the grave, and in the same issue in which he died.
Yeah, I have to say that you would think that for black goo and lots of hatred and things like that, it wouldn't resemble a bubble bath. But
Warm, and does it smell? You do kind of smell. Gosh, Dr. Issues, you smell an awful lot like flowers.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, I went there.
Okay.
Why not?
Yeah, but yeah, seriously, I know we mentioned in the episode, that's really intimate. Really intimate. Man, oh man. Those attacks, gotta wonder. Gee.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's going to do it for this first episode of Capes on the Couch. Again, we want to thank you all for listening. We appreciate any feedback that you might have. If you guys really like the show, you can please leave us a positive review on iTunes or Google Play. If you have some comments or questions or anything else, please feel free to reach out to us. We've got a Facebook page. We've got a Twitter, Capes on the Couch. And obviously you can go to our website, capesonthecouch.libsyn.com. And you can email us. It's capesonthecouch@gmail.com. And we look forward to any comments, criticism, critique, good, bad, ugly, wow. Whatever you may have, whatever comments that you you have about the show. Obviously, this is our first time doing this, so please, we're not going to get better at this unless we hear from you, the listeners, because, I know our wives and our families love us very much, and they'll tell us, oh, you guys are just doing swell.
Yep, TLDR, if it's bad news, email us. If it's good news, give us a great rating.
There you go. That's why he's Doc Issues, and I'm just the moron running the booth and the board here. So, anything else you want to add in closing, Doc?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for listening. This is something that I get great enjoyment out of, and I hope you do too.
Thanks. So we'll see you next week. Next week's episode is going to be The Joker.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. That's going to be a good one.
Absolutely. Oh, man, I can't wait.
So for Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. This is Capes on the Couch. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.